What is the absence of a thing? The absence of anything is not directly perceived. It is only the background that is really perceived, and the absence of a thing is superimposed upon that background. Where is consciousness in greater evidence? Suppose an empty space is shown to you for you to sit down. At once you recognize the absence of a seat there and refuse to sit. But in the case of the actual chair pointed out, no active thought is called for, and you safely ignore the part played by consciousness. Relatively speaking, the play of consciousness is more evident in the empty space than in the actual chair. What obstructs reality? The presence as well as absence of the object. When you see the wall without usual picture hanging on it, you form a percept and a concept together, the concept getting the better of the two. The percept or perception is the absence of the picture, and the concept is the idea of the presence of the picture. It is clear that the wall, as it is, will never be perceived if your attention is directed to either of the two. In a similar way, reality behind the world is obstructed both by the presence of the world in the waking and dream states and by its absence in the deep sleep state. You have to transcend both in order to reach the background. What is limitation? The presence of objects and absence of objects are respectively termed limitedness and unlimitedness, or conditionedness and unconditionedness of consciousness. The so-called unconditionedness is also a limitation put upon consciousness and is generally called samadhi or meditative absorption. But truth is still beyond this. Absolute and relative. What is relative? Relative means in relation to me, and not in relation to other objects, as is ordinarily understood. Everything is connected with me first, me being the self, and only through me to something else. How to bridge the gulf between the relative and the absolute? There is absolutely no bridge which can take you from the relative to the absolute. The only bridge existing is consciousness. But here there is only the bridge and no one to cross over. So a jump alone is possible to take you across. The absolute ceases to be the absolute if it stoops to give directions in worldly matters. But the disciple is corrected by his guru, even in the relative sphere. Thus you are led on to the absolute. What is meant by relative existence? All questions relating to the absolute can be explained only by illustrations from the world, where both parts are objective. The example of the pot and the earth is taken up here as an illustration in order to answer this question. The pot has no existence independent of the earth of which it is made. Or, in other words, the pot's existence is derived from the earth, which has a relatively more permanent existence. Similarly, objects have no existence independent of the self or the I principle. That is, the existence of the world is only relative to the subject I. Here, the I is not gross like the earth in the illustration. Still, the I is much better known than anything objective or gross. The existence of this I, though not apparent to the senses, is accepted by all persons alike. Everything else has an existence only in relation to this I. Things depend upon varying proofs to establish their existence, but the I alone stands in need of no such proof at all. It is self-evident, self-luminous. How to think about the Absolute? Strictly speaking, it is impossible to do so. Spiritual sadhaks, the aspirants, are often asked to think of the Absolute. The Absolute is clearly beyond all thought, and therefore it is impossible to think of it directly. There is no need for that sort of thought either, because you are always that. In order to think of the Absolute in any manner, you have to objectify it. You need only to eliminate yourself from all that is not self. When that is done, your real nature shines all alone in its own glory. That is Atma, the true self, which is self-luminous. Therefore, what the spiritual aspirant is actually asked to do is only this. In the guise of thinking of Atma, think of all that is non-Atma, all that constitutes mind and senses and body, and eliminate them from yourself. When left alone, you stand as Atma. Inert instruments can never think of the self-luminous I principle. So you must never attempt to speak or think of this I. But if you ever happen to think of this I, then just eliminate the thinking part alone, which is inert, and then you remain as you are. In one of the rishis' exposition of this truth, it takes you only to the tether end of witnesshood and leaves you still as a witness. But you should go even a step beyond the witness to the ultimate reality itself, proving that there is nothing else to be witnessed and that you are all alone, the Absolute. Actions. How to examine an action, a doing. It has to be done subjectively and not objectively. Then the doer and the deed both vanish, not being present in the doing. I know I am, but how to prove that this is no action? I say I am the doer and I am the enjoyer. The doer is not the enjoyer, but I am both. So I am the non-doer background of both. I know doing and enjoying. This knowing is my nature, not an action, for it never parts from me. Therefore, I know I am means I shine in my own light. Whose is the responsibility for action? The instrument is dead and inert. It can never be made to share responsibility for any deed. It is not the chopper that cuts the tree. It is the livingness you transmit to the chopper that cuts it. In a similar way, the body, senses, and mind are mere instruments under the true livingness or awareness, the I. That I is alone responsible for all action. Action is only the triad of doer, doing, and deed, or subject, activity, and object. Knowledge pertains only to the I. When you examine this triad of doer, doing, and deed, it vanishes in its due order, leaving you as pure knowledge, jnana. How are actions and ideas related? Ideas, repeated often, express themselves as actions. We might call them solidified ideas or beliefs. Other ideas which are not repeated remain as ideas, not solidified. These two might look different on the surface, but in essence they are the same. How to produce the best results of action? If you lose yourself in any action, that action will be most successful in the sense that it produces the best results. How to attain this self-forgetfulness? Direct the mind to its source, the Absolute, leaving a simple samskara, a silent inclination, that certain actions are to be performed. When the actions are thus left to themselves with the sense organs, and the lower reason is not available to guide them, then some principle from within, a kind of higher reason, automatically takes full responsibility of guiding the actions. Thus, under the supreme guidance of the all-knowing higher reason, the actions happen to be fulfilled to a wonderful degree of perfection. This higher reason is the Vidyavritti. But if ever the ego comes in any form, anywhere, in the course of the action, things go lamentably wrong. The apparent life of every sage, if closely observed, will provide numerous instances of the mysterious fulfillment of phenomenal activities in perfection, without an effort on his own part, and without his claiming the least credit for it. How to perform an action and be unattached? Worldly actions can be performed in two ways. The first, by identifying yourself completely with body, senses, and mind. Then the action is spontaneous. And second, by standing behind and controlling body, senses, and mind in order to achieve certain results, as in the case of the yogi. You are still the apparent I, but more detached from the body, senses, and mind. But there is still a higher kind of action which is not strictly worldly, which is the third. Stand beyond the mind as the witness of all activities of the mind. As witness, you are unaffected by objects or actions, and so you are unattached in your action.